All right, hello everyone. Today I kind of figured I would use this as an opportunity. I have a little bit of a downtime in the shop to talk about the history behind the blades, kind of my background, and each of the inspirations behind the general model categories. So this is going to be a bit of a model breakdown later on in the video as well, but realistically, a lot of the models are pretty similar, so that's why I only have my two personal blades that are up here. So to kind of give you guys a little bit of a background with me, I've worked a ton of different jobs. I've done blacksmithing, I've done landscaping, I've done electrical work. My background itself academically is in wildlife biology. So I have a lot of different experiences, most of which would involve me carrying a blade on me. So during that time, especially during the landscaping specifically, I would very heavily use two blades. One probably a little bit more than the other, but generally speaking, I would tend to stick with these two. The first one being the Mora Classic. This is the only one of these that I've ever owned, and this thing has been through thick and thin with me. I mean, you can see that the paint is wearing off the handle. It's got quite an intense patina. Some of that might even be a little bit of rust at this point, but I absolutely adore this knife. I've carried this with me on so many different occasions, and it's been a perfectly reliable blade. I can't say enough good things about this particular company, especially given the fact with how unbelievably cheap these are. So I've got the Mora Classic, and then I've got the Opinel. I believe this is, it's a number 8. I always want to say number 7. So this is the Opinel number 8. Anyone in the knife community is already abundantly familiar with both of these guys. I'm not going to spend too much time going into their background. Also, I apologize if I keep pushing things out of frame. Reasonably new to this, and I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of editing, if any at all. So just kind of keep that in mind. Apologies in advance. If you notice, both of these blades are pretty similar size. The handles, actually looking at them now side by side, are just about the same length too. And the Mora, I believe, is ever so slightly thicker, but generally speaking, their geometry, at least in regard to length and thickness, are pretty similar to one another. Of course, the Mora is a Scandi grind, whereas the Opinel is an incredibly thin, full flat grind. But both of these particular blades gave rise to what I found helpful in a fixed blade, or just in a knife in general. And unfortunately, stock thickness like this is, I would say, a lot of times, or at the very least, the market kind of portrays it as being synonymous with being, fragile or inexpensive. I guess inexpensive would probably be a better word to describe it. And I've found that to be true, at least in terms of the pricing, not in terms of fragility. If anything, I found the exact opposite to be true. Despite these blades being incredibly thin and by what most people would probably consider, reasonably flexible, these are phenomenal knives. I've not had any of them let me down. I've never experienced any chips or any, any breaks or bends or anything like that. So, that kind of got me thinking. After relying on these two knives for the longest time, I've been making knives since I was, I want to say 12, around there, maybe even a little bit younger. I couldn't really find any sort of like premium alternatives to these particular blades. A lot of times, and I'm guilty of this too, you look at fixed blades, and I say guilty of this back when I first had started making knives, a lot of blades were made using thicker stock. I had started, like probably just about every other knife maker under the sun, using either 3/32 or 1/8 inch stock. I've started with carbon steels and kind of migrated and worked my way up to stainless steels. But I had started making thicker blades, and even though I carried those thick blades with me a lot, I think I actually might have a remnant of one down here somewhere. You could see, like, this was one of my very first fixed blades that I had made with removable scales, and you could see, I believe that this is 1/8 inch thick stock. And even though I made and carried this particular blade on me a lot, it didn't exactly cut as well. And of course, like, yeah, you could certainly say, well, of course, that's obvious. A thicker blade isn't going to cut as well as a thinner blade. That's a little bit obvious. So making that transition, I realized that pretty quickly. So when I had started making knives, I had wanted to kind of adapt the qualities that I had found most desirable from these two particular blades, the ones that I had carried and used the most. Now, mind you, there are a few others, like I do carry the Spyderco Chaparral on occasion, but most of the time, prior to making my own blades that kind of fit my needs, these were the two that I would carry. So you can see these guys, I'll get the opened up again, set that one off to the side there. You can kind of see where the inspirations came from. Now, this is the Zephyr. The Zephyr is the newest model that I've created aside from kind of like the other spin-offs. This one is entirely new in the sense that it doesn't follow the platform of the other blades that we're going to talk about there in a second. But I basically had taken everything that I loved from the Mora Classic and turned this into a fixed blade that I would personally want to carry. Because again, this is a fantastic belt knife, but it's not exactly ideal for in-pocket carry. So I had taken everything that I had liked from the Mora Classic and I had turned it into a compact fixed blade with a more premium stainless steel. This one is in Nitro V, and I'll show you the differences between these models in a second, but this one is incredibly thin. The stock is already thin. Everyone knows that I use 16th inch thick steel, but this one is the only model that I currently have that uses 3/16 inch thick scales on either side. The Zephyr and all the other series, they use 1/4 inch thick scales. So you can see the direct comparison there. I do prefer full flat grinds over Scandi grinds, which is why the difference is there. But you can very clearly see the inspiration. And of course, I added a little tiny lanyard hole. I don't typically carry with lanyards, but I figured for those who do, it takes only an extra second to add that option. So I carry the Zephyr with me more than anything else. This is the only knife that I've designed that I can carry in pocket and have it entirely disappear and forget that it's there like a folding knife. And I think that largely is in part to how thin it is. I kind of think of it like a Sharpie attached to a credit card in terms of weight and how much space they take up in the pocket. So in terms of the other models, nearly everything else follows this platform. And of course, I apologize that my blades are a little bit scratched up. These are, of course, my personal carries. So the satin finish does get a little bit marred over time, but you can see it still holds up pretty well. Now, the only reason why I have the Nymph out in front here is because I'm actually going to go around the corner here really quick and show you that the templates for all of the other models follow the same exact handle ergonomics and platform. So of course, like you have the Nymph template, the Sedge template, the Chiton template, all of those guys, they all follow the same handle ergonomics. The blades, at least in terms of their grinds, are all the same. The only thing that varies between each of these models is just the blade profile. So, you know, you have your standard drop point on the Chiton, you have a traditional sheep split on the Sedge, you have that kind of reverse Tonto, modified sheep split, whatever word you want to use to describe the Nymph. And, you know, each of those come with their little bit of a specific use case, but generally speaking, each of these guys are geometrically the same. Now, when you compare the Nymph to, or I should say what I'm going to call these ultimately, I'm going to end up categorizing these guys, and this is pretty much everything. This is the Nymph, the Chiton, the Sedge, the Maverick, the Bramble. All of those guys are going to be categorized as the Field series, and I'm going to expand on this line, and I'm going to call this the Stone series, simply because these guys have a little bit of a gemstone kind of pattern going on. And for those of you who've seen my Instagram story, you'll recognize that I have another one coming that's more octagonal rather than hexagonal. So I'm really excited about that one. But, you know, looking at these guys, length is pretty much identical. It's a little bit hard to tell just because of the Nymph having, you know, a lot more of a lot more curves than the Zephyr does. But the Zephyr is ever so slightly longer. But the big difference comes from not even necessarily the width of the blade, simply because, I mean, there might be like a 1/4 inch difference there, but not too much. Now, the huge difference comes into play in terms of their ergonomics. It's a little bit difficult to illustrate here just because this particular blade has the layered G10. And that black layer is not doing us any favors in terms of seeing the overall width, but you have black, forest green, I believe that's acid green, and then sand G10 that I had layered together. And each of those layers is 16 3/16 of an inch thick. So you have 3/16 and then 1/4 inch thick here, which I wanted to get these guys ever so slightly thinner, but realistically the 1/4 inch just feels better with this particular platform. And then the 3/16 inch fits very well with the Zephyr. So I have found that the geometry of both of these blades works very well for the purposes that I was using them for. You know, thin blades, cutting organic materials, working in the forest, working in ornamental settings. All of those things favored very, very well for cutting organic material. And of course, that translates well into like EDC tasks, like cutting cardboard, that sort of stuff. So Zephyr is what I personally carry all the time. I'm very excited about the next model that I'm going to be introducing in that line. That one is going to be called the Wisp. So we're going to have the Zephyr, the Wisp, and then this line is pretty much done. I want to say I've exhausted pretty much all of my options in terms of blade shapes. In that category, I might at some point do a Tonto. It's not exactly my most favorite grind to work on, which is why I've kind of avoided them in the past. So we'll see how that ends up going. I don't really have any plans to make larger fixed blades. There might be a few that I introduce here in the future, or I should say reintroduce, because I wanted to provide a little bit of context on the names of the individual models. And of course, you know, I don't have all of them here in front of me because I'm getting ready for the knife show, but regardless, these guys. So I had originally started, like I kind of mentioned earlier on in the video, making mid-size fixed blades. And I actually do have one remaining blank from one of the older models that has the rough grind working on it, where it was this guy. So I had started making these with 3/32 inch steel. I believe that this guy is AEBL, and ultimately I had stopped making these. To be entirely blunt, the market is pretty heavily saturated with mid-size fixed blades. Everyone is making them. They're nothing, as a general category, they're nothing unique. There's tons of talented makers who do make mid-size fixed blades, and I think that's fantastic, and larger fixed blades. But for me, I've kind of found that my niche, both in what I like to use and what I like to make, is mainly smaller fixed blades. So these guys, I had originally started making mid-size fixed blades, and I had a ton of different models. I had tried so many different things. I had gone with Greek naming themes, and then I had done nature themes and blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, what I had settled on were 3 main fixed blades. And I wish that I had them here, but I don't have any of them left. I had the Aspen, the Apatox, and then the Odo. Now, to kind of give you the background behind their names, the Aspen, that just, you know, ties into the forestry stuff. The quaking aspen is my favorite tree species. Then this guy, which was the drop point, was the Apatox, and Apatox is short for apatoxin. That is the venom found in bee stingers. And then the Odo, which was short for Odonata, which was the dragonfly clade. So these guys had originally started off as what I called the mini series, and then is now kind of migrated over to the field series. The reason why they were called the mini series is because they were the smaller counterparts to these blades. You can see here with the Apatox and the chitin that they're pretty much a direct copy of one another. It's a little bit different, but generally speaking, very, very similar, and they're smaller in every way, both in length and stock thickness. So the Aspen gave rise to a model called the Sprout, which I don't offer anymore because it's very similar to the chitin. Then we had the Odo, which was, you know, dragonfly themed. That gave rise to the Nymph, which is, of course, you know, a small version of that. And that was it. Ultimately, what I found out, though, is that people really enjoyed the smaller fixed blades, which I was like, that's awesome, because I really enjoy making them. And I took this platform and the ergonomics, which I'm very proud of. I think that they're very, very comfortable knives. And I started expanding on it in those different blade shapes. So I've kind of gotten away from calling them the mini series simply because their larger counterparts don't exist anymore. I have had a few people reach out to me and say that they want Aspens made, so I will probably make a very small batch of them in the future, but don't expect them to be a standard. One of the reasons why I'm able to keep my prices so low and kind of like the inexpensive nature of this, it's both like a, I guess, an ethical thing for me and a practical thing. It just kind of works out that way in the finances. Thin blades are usually a little bit, and I hate to use the word cheaper, I'll say they're a little bit more inexpensive to make. You go through less abrasives, the steel itself is cheaper because you are buying less of it, and generally speaking, it's a little bit easier to kind of get more bang for your buck out of thinner steel. So personally, that was one of the reasons why I really enjoyed carrying these blades, is because these are reasonably inexpensive. I believe that the Open Ls are like $20 today, and the more classic I think are only like 18 bucks. They might even be less expensive than that. I had absolutely adored using those blades, and one of the reasons why I had enjoyed using them is because I never really felt afraid of using them because of their price point. So it just so happens that making thinner blades works out incredibly well for me because they are a little bit less expensive for me to make, which allows me to then keep them at a lower price point. Now, there are some difficulties when grinding thinner blades that, even though it might be a little bit quicker, there's a lot more that you need to pay attention to. There's less material to remove. So, getting a crisp grind can be a little bit more challenging. But for me, I really do enjoy making blades of this size, and it fits well with both the ethics or the ethos of wanting to provide a quality blade at a low price. And it just so happens to work out that way with the cost of the materials and the materials that go into making them. So I really enjoy making those, and I'm kind of glad that I've managed to occupy that niche. But that's exactly why so many of those names kind of tie to like smaller versions of that thing. Chitin being the material that's found in the exoskeleton of insects and whatnot, and fungi, and aspen and sprout, and then odonata and the nymph. And then it just kind of spread out. Like the sedge, that name came from a wetlands training that I was involved in, and we were digging some holes in the middle of a marsh. I split my finger open on some grass, and I was like, wow, that was a lot sharper than I expected it. So I came back, and a lot of people had been asking for a sheep's foot, so we came up with that name there. And yeah, I would say all of these have their name or their background in either old model names or something that I'd come up with either through the background that I was doing in, or the work that I was doing in conservation or forestry. And that kind of ended up culminating exactly in what we have here today. At some point in the future, I would really like the opportunity to kind of expand on this line. But for the time being, it's reasonably inexpensive for me to make these blades, despite having materials that are sourced within the US, doing everything in my shop. But exploration and kind of trying to do new blade designs and everything like that does end up becoming a little bit more challenging when you start making all of your blanks by hand instead of having them laser cut like I do. So that's why it's a little bit more challenging for me to kind of expand upon these lines more than I have already. But things are coming down the line. I do intend on moving things along in that direction, because I do want to offer more blades, more colors, more blade finishes, things like that. But the more options that are there, the more challenging it kind of becomes for me. So either way, hopefully that was more of a coherent rambling than an incoherent rambling. But I just wanted to make a quick video as to why my blades are so thin and a little bit on the smaller side. It's just a culmination of all my personal experiences, what I found to be useful in a blade, and how I could translate that into kind of the modern world and what the everyday carry community might want to see, and what I personally use. So again, like I said in the last video, I do really enjoy this stuff. If anyone has any questions about anything like this, or if they want to see any particular blade designs or why I choose Nitro V and AEBL and things like that, I'm happy to answer any of those questions. But for right now, this video is already getting a little bit long. I just wanted to touch on those points, and yeah, thanks for listening.